What's going on, guys? My name is soestermountain and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing a tier list for every faction in Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. Now let's get into it! First off, we have the most classic faction, the Tribal faction. This faction is very basic, but that was to be expected for this faction. But they're not bad in any way. That said, they are not excellent in many ways. It's just a good to have faction. There's very powerful units like the Mammoth, the Chieftain, and the Bone Mage. Then there's expendable units, we'll call them, the Clubber and the Protector. The Spear Thrower is also useful. So I'm going to kick this off with a nice and standard B tier. Alright, the Farmer faction. Oh boy, this is a bit of a hodgepodge of really random units. Well, almost all of these are actually. It's a little worse than the Tribal faction, I'd say. The super unit, or the most expensive unit in this faction, is the Scarecrow. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the Scarecrow. He does have his uses, but those uses are few and far between. So I'm gonna put the Farmer faction at a C tier. The Medieval faction. What is there to say about the Medieval faction? Also pretty basic. Yeah, you've got the standard foot soldiers, archers, and the knights. The king is a really good unit, but basic. You have the bard, which is, an okay distraction, but the hobbits are just as good as a distraction as the bard. So, but I do like the Medieval faction a little more than the Farmer faction. So I'm going to put the Medieval faction also in the B tier. The Ancient faction. Right. The Ancient faction has probably some of the best cheap units. The Sarissa, the Shieldmen, and the Hoplites. I love those units. They're cheap. You can make a standard formation with them. I love it. But they also have Zeus, which is a really good unit for crowd control. They also have the Minotaur, which is a little worse. He is outranked by the King and another unit we're gonna talk about, the Jarl, which is in the Viking faction, which is up next. They're alright for melee combat, but they go down a little too easy. So what do I do? I'm gonna put these also at a B tier. I may shuffle around these templates a little bit, but it's good enough for now. Alright, the Viking faction. I really like this faction. It has so many great units. The Jarl, it has the Brawler, the Berserker, even the Headbutter is really useful. But the Longship is a little disappointing. No. It can't really aim. Well, who could have guessed you can't aim a boat at units? The Ice Archer is also really cool. The Longship does keep it from being an S tier, so I'm gonna put the Vikings in an A tier. Right. The Dynasty faction. I also really like these. It has one of my favorite units in the game, the Dragon, The ninjas are pretty good. The samurai are also one of the best cheap units in the game. The firework archers, they're alright. There's the Monkey King and the Monk. Right, I don't know enough about the Monkey King. I do need to use him a bit more. But I will also put this faction in the A tier. Okay, the Renaissance faction. It has its uses, definitely. The Fencer is a really good unit. It has the Da Vinci tank, which is little hit or miss, but still pretty good. It has the Jouster. I mean, the Jouster, it's kind of weak, but alright for getting around the front lines and into the back lines. The Balloon Archer, I've never been a huge fan of the Balloon Archer. So, for now, I'm also going to put it in C tier. The Pirates are also a little hit or miss, because they've got really good units, but also not that great units. The Flintlocks, they don't do enough damage, but it's fine enough. They're alright. The Blunderbuss is pretty good. There's the Cannon that is also alright, but there is a superior version to the Cannon coming up. We've got the Captain, which is also okay. The Pirate Queen is one of the best units in the game, in my opinion. She is really good. But, that said, also a C tier. Oh boy, the Spooky faction. Now this is going to be very controversial, but I think the Spooky faction is the worst faction in the game. There are only 2 saving graces for the Spooky faction, but that does not make it any higher than an F tier. The vampires that are moderately useful, and the Reaper. Now, the Reaper is really hit or miss because he goes down way too easy, and he doesn't output enough damage to compensate for it. The rest of the units are the same way. They go down way too easily. Alright. The faction that I've looked at most recently. The Wild West faction. The Wild West faction has a trait that the other factions don't really have. They're fun to use. They're not the best, but they're pretty fun to use. They've got a lot of guns. They've got the Cactus, which I really like. They've got dynamite throwers, though, which are really quite crap. The miners are okay. There's the horses, or the lassos, which are like the Jouster. They're not good enough. They go down too easily. So, although they're fun to use, they can be really easily countered. So I'm going to put them at the high end of C tier. Almost a B tier. Okay, so the Legacy faction. The biggest faction in the game, probably. Besides maybe the Secret faction, but we'll get to that. What do I have to say about the Legacy faction? They have almost everything at their disposal. They have cheap units in the form of the peasants. They've got units that give orders. They've got the chariot, Thor, the super boxer, the tank, the wizard, and of course the 2 super units that you're never going to use outside of the sandbox. Hold on, you guys. I'm being called. In all seriousness, I was actually called. That wasn't a joke. Okay, like I said, before someone called me, and I had to do that, the Legacy faction. Where was I? I had mentioned all the units, the super units. They are really good. I was thinking about putting them in S tier, but I am contradicting that because you're never going to use the Super Peasant or the Dark Peasant in campaign anytime soon. The only super unit that you can realistically hope to use is the Super Boxer. He is really good, but I still don't know. He's really expensive. And that's the thing about this faction, is the units are either really cheap or really expensive. So, for that reason, they have to go in A tier. The good faction. Okay. So, the good faction is... what is there to say about these guys? Like their name suggests, they're good. They're not amazing. They've got weak spots. The shield bearer of the faction, I don't remember her name. She is not great at her job. There is the Radiant Glaive that throws projectiles like Zeus a little bit, but he does go down a little easy. There's the Sacred Elephant, which is, I don't know if I like him more than the Mammoth. Then there's the super unit, the Chronomancer. He's a super unit, yes, but not the best. So, honestly, I want to put these guys in D tier. Potentially controversial, but I don't care. This is not a democracy. Now, on to one of my favorite factions in the game, the Evil faction. Oh boy, this is probably the faction I have the most fun with. They're powerful, they're somewhat balanced, they've got intense units that can destroy everything in the path, like the Void Monarch. Yes, the Void Monarch. It's also got units that you can formulate strategy with, like the Shadow Walker. I may see this in a little bit of a rose-tinted glass, but honestly, that's the first S tier. I love the Evil faction. Alright, and the final faction. The Secret faction. The Secret faction, I mean, does this really count? You're going to see less of this in the campaign, but nonetheless, they have really powerful units. They've basically got everything. Need a giant? They've got that. Need a super weak unit that can maul units? The Raptor. Need a middle ground unit? Vlad. Need a horse? They've got cavalry. Yeah, so they've got pretty much everything for every situation. So I am going to put this in the S tier for that reason. Now, I do see one that needs to be interchanged. The Farmer faction is going to get degraded to a D tier. Compared to these factions, the Farmer faction does not hold up. Alright, and that is the completed tier list. Let me know what you guys have or think of this down in the comments below. And if you want to see more tabs content on my channel, definitely leave a like, comment down below, and make sure to subscribe for more wonderful content just like this. But anyways, guys, I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.